by far the strongest Aetherdrift commander out there. But we decided to build it on a budget. Hashaton, Scarab's Fist. Since this commander got spoiled, everyone started building CDH decks with him. He's an absolute combo machine. But we decided to make a powerful self-discard and reanimation deck out of him on a €100 budget. So why Hashaton? First up, he's a 2-drop. You can play him on turn 2. When he gets removed, you get 2 commander attacks and he still only costs 4 mana. He has a 1/3 stat line, so he dodges some board wipes that deal 2 damage to everything. But his ability is where it gets really, really crazy. Whenever you discard a creature card, you get a Hashaton trigger, meaning you get to pay 1 blue and 2 generic mana, create a 4/4 tapped zombie creature token of the creature you just discarded. This is absolutely crazy. The fact that he doesn't even exile the card that you copy, that you just discarded, is absolutely bananas. This means the creature will still be in our graveyard and we will be able to reanimate the original creature. As for the zombie token we get, it does everything. We get ETB triggers, we get all the static effects on the card. Just imagine discarding a Hullbreaker Horror on turn 3 and creating a 4/4 copy of it. Insane. Your opponents will have to deal with a Hullbreaker Horror ability starting from turn 3. Crazy. And this deck will even be able to reanimate the original Hullbreaker Horror afterwards, just doubling up on the value. His mana cost has white and black in it, while the ability has a blue pip in it, meaning Hashaton is an Esper card. Esper is well known for being the best reanimation color combo there is. Esper also gives us access to a lot of control tools, board wipes, counter spells, bounce spells, and best of all, really, really big reanimation targets. I'm really excited for this deck. It was a lot of fun making it, so I divided the video up in 6 categories. The discard outlets, the discard targets, reanimation spells, interaction spells, the ramp spells, and most importantly, the lands. So let's dive straight into the discard outlets. When we say discard outlet, we mean a card that easily allows us to discard cards from our hand, granting us a benefit or just discarding a card so we can get a free Hashaton trigger. We'll start off with Careful Study, one of the most efficient discard cards there is. Just 1 mana, we get to draw 2 cards and discard 2 cards. Very efficient. A card featured in the Hashaton Precon deck is Cryptbreaker. He's a 1 mana zombie. For 2 mana and discarding a card, we get to create a 2/2 zombie token. Very efficient, grants us some blockers and gives us Hashaton triggers. We can also tap 3 untapped zombies we control. We pay 1 life and draw a card. This dude is a zombie, Hashaton is a zombie, and the tokens Hashaton generates are also zombies. Very solid creature. For 1 mana, we have Restless Dreams. As an additional cost to cast it, we have to discard X cards. Then when it resolves, we get to return X creatures from our graveyard to our hand. Perfect if we just discarded 3 big dudes, we made tokens with it with Hashaton. We can just refuel our hand and get additional Hashaton triggers at the same time. Because the card allows us to discard cards and return creatures from our graveyard to our hand, which we can discard again and just make copies again. Perfect card. Just remember, you do need targets to return from your graveyard to your hand. If you have no targets, you cannot cast this card. It will be an illegal play. We don't really care about food tokens. That being said, the Underworld Cookbook is a really efficient discard engine. Just 1 mana artifact, we can easily drop it on turn 1. You can just tap it, discard a card, create a food token. For 4 mana and sacrificing it, we also get to return a creature card from our graveyard to our hand. Not really that relevant on our deck, it's not why we play it, but later in the game might provide really useful to just return a big creature and we get to discard it again and copy it with Hashaton. A card we also mentioned with Hashaton in our top 5 commanders video is Tortured Existence. And it's probably because it's just the best card there is for Hashaton. The card also spiked in price immensely when Hashaton just got spoiled. And this is why. It's a 1 mana enchantment with a simple ability. For 1 black mana, we get to discard a creature card and return a creature card from our graveyard to our hand. You can just imagine how crazy this gets with Hashaton. It's a 1 mana discard engine, perfect to create token copies, and we also can recur our big threats from our graveyard to our hand. And then just discard them to Tortured Existence once again, create more copies. Crazy. You have to include this in any Hashaton deck as well. It's an auto-include really. Doesn't matter if you play budget or CDH, it's just a very solid card. Ghostly Pilferer. This dude has a lot of text, but all his abilities are really awesome. First up, it's a 2-drop. Comes down really early. Whenever he gets untapped, we get to pay 2 generic mana, and we can draw a card. Pretty solid, nice card advantage. Whenever an opponent casts a spell from anywhere other than their hand, we also get to draw a card. Once again, really solid ability. If people cheat in creatures or flashback spells, we just get to draw cards. Now those 2 awesome abilities are not even the reason why we play this little guy. The main reason we play it is his third ability. It's the least flashy ability of all 3, but it just allows us to discard cards for free. We don't have to do anything for it. We don't have to pay mana, we don't have to tap it. We can just discard our entire hand to this guy and make copies with Hashaton. Really good card. Likeness Looter. The little flying creature, we can tap it to draw a card and discard a card. Very solid to drop. Every turn we can just discard a card, draw a card, and make copies with Hashaton. He has a second ability, which is really awesome. We can pay X generic mana, and we can turn him into a copy of any creature into our graveyard with mana value X. As you know by now, we will have really big targets in our graveyard to actually use this on, and it's just an added benefit in the late game, just granting us extra copies of our biggest creatures we will already have Hashaton copies of. I didn't even notice this when I was building deck, I just noticed it right now when shooting the video. It isn't even until end of turn. This creature stays a copy of the copied creature, and he also gets this ability, so we can even change it up, but it doesn't stop on end of turn. So imagine turning this into an Elesh Norn, it will just stay an Elesh Norn. Crazy. If your commander tax is too high because you play in a table with a lot of board wipes or spot removal, you can just make Hashaton go to the graveyard, and for 2 mana, this dude can turn into a copy of Hashaton. Really good. Macabre Waltz. Very simple card, allows us to return 2 creatures from our graveyard to our hand so we can discard them again, and we also get to discard a card afterwards. So we can just return 2 creatures, discard one of them, get a Hashaton trigger, and create a copy. Another simple discard engine, Merfolk Looter. It's a small little body, we can tap him, draw a card, discard a card. We need ways to trigger Hashaton. Also mentioned in our top 5 commander video in the Hashaton section is Psychic Frog. This dude makes up for 10% of the entire price of the deck, but we just had to include him. It's a 2-drop with insane abilities for Hashaton. First up, whenever he deals combat damage to a player, we get to draw a card. Pretty solid for a 2-drop. When someone doesn't have blockers, we can just generate card advantage. Same reason as Ghostly Pilferer, we can also discard cards whenever we want to put a +1/+1 counter on Psychic Frog. Remember, when we discard a creature, for example with Psychic Frog, during an opponent's turn, we still get a Hashaton trigger and we can semi-flash in a creature during their turn. Insane. We can also exile 3 cards from our graveyard, and Psychic Frog gets flying until the end of turn. Remember his first ability, whenever we do combat damage, we draw a card? Yeah, it's a perfect synergy between ability 1 and ability 3. The main reason why he's the best discard outlet there is, just imagine having this on the field on turn 2, discarding your cards to it from like turn 2, turn 3, turn 4, turn 5, and his body will just be insanely big and you will just be able to lethal people with this little frog. It's crazy, especially because you can grant him flying. Another 2-drop creature that allows us to tap it and draw a card, discard a card is Rona. It has an added benefit: whenever we cast a legendary spell, we get to untap it. So sometimes you will be able to use this ability twice in one turn. For 1 black for action mana and 5 generic mana, we also get to flip it. Honestly, we don't really play the card to flip it, we just play it because it's a 2-drop, we can tap and untap, so we can get a lot of discards out of it. The backside is a 5/5 body with trample. Whenever it gets dealt damage, an opponent has to exile something from their hand. If it's a land, you get it back under your control. Not that relevant, but it might happen in some games when you go really late game. But it's not that relevant. Another 2-drop discard engine. What do you know? This is one of the better ones though. We also get to tap it to draw a card and discard a card. When a discarded card is an instant or sorcery though, each opponent loses 1 life and we gain 1 life. 2 generic mana, we also get to sacrifice Vohar and give an instant or sorcery in our graveyard flashback of sorts. Whenever we cast a spell, we do have to exile it, but hey, it's more recursion in our self-mill deck. Another auto-inclusion in any Hashaton deck, Frantic Search. 3 mana, we get to draw 2 cards, discard 2 cards, and we also get to untap 3 lands. The Hashaton trigger will go on the stack after casting this, so you will have 3 untapped lands to instantly make a copy with Hashaton. Just imagine dropping Hashaton on turn 2, on turn 3 you play Frantic Search, draw 2, discard 2, you discard a big creature, untap 3 lands, and you can instantly pay for the Hashaton ability to make a copy. Doesn't get any better than this. Obsessive Stitcher, perfect fit for the deck since it does 2 things that this deck is about. It reanimates creatures and allows us to loot cards. So we can tap it, draw a card, discard a card. 4 mana, and sacrificing it, we also get to reanimate a creature from our graveyard. Very solid creature. Raffine, Scheming Seer. You probably saw this as a commander at some tables already, but this time we play it in the 99. Just because of the fact that it has Connive. Connive is an awesome mechanic for Hashaton, allowing us to draw cards and discard cards. Whenever we discard a non-land card, we also get to put a +1/+1 counter on a creature. We don't really care about the counters, mainly about the discarding, but the Raffine gets out of hand really fast. Whenever we attack, target creature connives X, where X is our amount of attacking creatures. If we get to connive 5, we get to draw 5, discard 5. We can go through our deck really quickly, fill the graveyard, get a ton of Hashaton triggers. It's just crazy. The fact that she has ward and flying, we can also just connive on her, make her into a really big body and just swing with her for lethal. It's a very solid card. Teferi, Master of Time. This is probably one of my favorite cards ever printed, and many people don't understand how this works. I'll explain it to you. So his passive ability says we can activate his abilities at any time we can use an instant ability, also during opponent's turns. This means when he comes down, we can just activate him on our turn, even on instant speed. Nice little benefit. When we go to the next player's turn, we also get to activate him again. We can use him once per turn, but also during our opponent's turns. Why this is awesome? You drop him on your turn, activate him, goes to player 2, activate him, goes to player 3, activate him, goes to player 4, activate him, back to you, and yeah, you just got 4 activations in 1 round around the table. Yeah, Teferi is just crazy. We didn't even get into his abilities yet. His abilities are also perfect for Hashaton. +1, this is what the deck is about, allows us to draw a card and discard a card. Once again, if I activate this during an opponent's turn, you get to create a Hashaton copy during an opponent's turn, giving us sort of instant speed for the creature copies we create. Crazy. Yeah, I know what you're saying. Obviously, you don't have the mana to create a Hashaton copy in every player's turn, because you will need 12 mana for this. This will not happen. Teferi has more abilities, and they're also really great. His -3 allows you to target a creature you don't control and make it phase out. Won't bother you until that player's next upkeep. It's crazy, you can just remove threats and you won't be bothered by them for an entire turn. As just mentioned, in the turn cycle, his loyalty will add up really quickly. The ultimate is just fantastic. When you have 10 loyalty, you can -10 him and you get to take 2 extra turns after this one. Yeah, if you can't win from 2 extra turns, you were not gonna win the game anyways. Last discard outlet, Scourge Familiar. It's a 5 mana discard outlet. Yeah, the other ones in the deck are way more efficient than this one, but it does have a nice little bonus. We just get to discard cards whenever we want. When we do get to add 1 black mana to our mana pool. Really awesome to generate a ton of mana if we have a hand full of cards. Solid card. And it also has flying, just in case you need a blocker. Before we get into the big creatures you actually want to discard and reanimate in this Hashaton deck, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you like this content. Let's get into the big discard targets. Small reminder, we are on a budget of 100 euros for this deck, so we don't play the big bats like Avacyn, Elesh Norn. We're kinda limited in that way. That being said, let's get started. Archfiend of Ifnir. This big dude just plays into the discard fantasy of our deck. Whenever we discard or cycle a card, we get to put a -1/-1 counter on each creature our opponents control. Really solid. Acts as a one-sided board wipe for the entire table if you can just discard enough cards. Remember all the discard outlets we just saw previously in this video. Also has cycling himself, so when Hashaton is on the field, we get to pay 2 mana, discard this card, and for 3 mana, we can also create a copy of it. And we get to draw a card because we just cycled it. Pretty solid. Classic finisher in any black deck. Gaggy. Whenever we play him, each opponent loses life equal to our devotion to black. We gain that much life. Drains the table really fast. When we make a copy of this with Hashaton, the tokens also trigger ETBs. Very, very solid game finisher, especially if you have a lot of devotion on the table. Remember, the token copies we make with Hashaton actually do have a mana cost, so the devotion of the token copies we make with Hashaton actually counts toward Gary. The more you know. Last minute addition to the deck is Marnius Calgar. Once again, a very popular Esper commander. First up, he has a 3/5 body with double strike, so Hashaton's 4/4 zombie copy will also have double strike. Whenever a token enters the battlefield under our control, we do get to draw a card. When we make a copy of this guy, we also draw a card from itself. So actually replaces itself whenever we make a copy. Very solid. When we make more copies with Hashaton, we get to draw more cards. For 6 mana, we can also activate his ability and create 2 2/2 warrior tokens with vigilance, triggering his own ability. One of my personal favorite new inclusions from the Aetherdrift set is Riptide Gearhulk. I really have a feeling a lot of people are sleeping on this card. He's even better in Hashaton than he is in any other deck. And we get to discard this and create a copy. Our 4/4 zombie token will have double strike and prowess, turning the token into a real game finisher. If we just cast some non-creature spells, it will be a really big body with double strike. Best part about this card, and most misunderstood part, is the enter the battlefield trigger. When Riptide Gearhulk enters the battlefield, for each opponent, I will repeat, for each opponent, we get to pick 1 non-land permanent and put it on top of their library, third from the top. So just get to tuck a card into their deck. This is even better than removal because they can't interact with it since it's in their deck, not even in their graveyard. Perfect against reanimator decks. Massacre Worm, classic reanimation target. Whenever he enters the battlefield, every creature your opponents control will get -2/-2. And whenever a creature your opponents control dies, we get to draw a card. If you ever played Massacre Worm, you know how good this guy is. If you can just wipe 3 mana dorks, you draw 3 cards, the value is insane. The ultimate nightmare of my Necrobloom deck is Sire of Stagnation. It's a really good value card to just reanimate, very solid Eldrazi. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, they have to exile the top 2 cards of their library, and we get to draw 2 cards. As you know, in Magic, people will always be playing lands, so we will be drawing a ton of cards. We're really playing all the popular Esper commanders in the 99 of this deck. Divot, Seller of Secrets. So flying, War 3, really hard to deal with, and has an awesome ability. Whenever he enters the battlefield or deals combat damage to a player, every player gets to vote, starting with you. They can choose to give you a clue token or a treasure token. Static ability on the bottom of the card also says you get to vote an additional time. So when this enters the battlefield, you're playing with 4 people, you will get some sort of clue or treasure tokens, you will just gain value. Once again, when you get to swing with the zombie token, deal combat damage, this will trigger again. It's crazy. Agent of Treachery. It's a 2/3 body, so when we make a copy with Hashaton, we will actually improve his stats as a 4/4. When he enters the battlefield, we get control of target permanent. It's a very solid ETB effect, especially if we can do it multiple times. In the beginning of our end step, if we control 3 permanents that we don't own, we do get to draw 3 cards. Added benefit, you probably will not pull this off many times, but it is very possible in this deck. Angel of Serenity. Whenever she enters the battlefield, we get to exile 3 creatures from the battlefield or graveyards. They stay exiled for as long as Angel of Serenity stays on the battlefield. Whenever she leaves the battlefield, all those creatures are returned to their owner's hands. With Hashaton, we can make copies on instant speeds in some cases, so we can just, when we get attacked, create a copy of Angel of Serenity, exile the attacking creatures, and yeah, Bob's your uncle. Angel of the Ruins. When she enters the battlefield, she exiles 2 target enchantments or artifacts. Very solid. She also has basic plane cycling, meaning we can pay 2 generic mana, discard her, search her library for a basic planes, add it to our hand. When we do plane cycle her, we do get the opportunity with Hashaton on the field to make a copy of it. We don't need a discard outlet for this one to work. Please let us know in the comments if you like Chancellor of the Annex. It's one of my personal favorite cards. You don't have to include it in the deck, but I just love the card. When we have it in our opening hand, we get to reveal it, and the first spell each opponent will cast will cost 1 generic mana more. This really slows down games to your benefit. When she is in play, she also has a static ability to make every spell your opponents cast cost 1 generic mana more. It's really crippling, especially if you have multiple copies of this out on the battlefield with Hashaton. Crazy card in my opinion. I really wonder how you feel about the card. Perfect option when you're on a budget. Drogskull Reaver. Flying, double strike, lifelink. The zombie token will get all of these abilities. Whenever we gain life, we get to draw a card. When our lifelink double strike zombie swings, deals 2 hits, we get to draw 2 cards. We mentioned it at the start of the video. Here he is, Hullbreaker Horror. We can't play a blue reanimation deck without playing this dude. He has simple abilities, but really game breaking. Whenever we cast a spell, we get to return a non-land permanent to the owner's hand, or a spell on the stack to the owner's hand. It's a really good card. It's really hard to deal with, especially in a deck like this. Luminous Primordial. More removal on a big body. When he enters the battlefield, for each opponent, once again, same as with the Riptide Gearhulk, we get to pick 1 creature, exile it, and the owner gains life equal to the toughness. So, most cases, you will get to exile 1 creature of each opponent, netting in 3 creatures being removed. Runescarred Demon. Demonic Tutor on a really big stick, which is good for us because we can reanimate it and make copies of it. Whenever it enters the battlefield, we get to search our library for 1 card, and put it into our hand. We don't even have to reveal it. We can just grab the perfect card we need at the time in the game. Sepulchral Primordial. Took me 5 times to pronounce this right, by the way. Whenever it enters the battlefield, we get to pick 1 creature from each opponent's graveyard, once again, each opponent's graveyard, and put it onto the battlefield under our control. This is not until end of turn, we just get to reanimate a creature from every opponent's graveyard and it just stays under our control. Ashen Rider. I don't think any deck plays this without cheating it into play with a reanimation spell or something. And whenever it enters the battlefield, we get to exile a permanent. Very solid with Hashaton, once again. But it does cost a lot of mana, so you probably won't hardcast this, ever. Sphinx of the Second Sun. And the name really does do it justice. After your second main phase, you do get a new beginning phase. Meaning you will untap everything again, have another upkeep, draw another card. The value on this is just crazy. Just imagine cheating this into play on turn 3 and generating a ton of value. It's really crazy. One of the better reanimation targets in this deck. Last but not least, Tidespout Tyrant. One of the best reanimation targets ever printed. When he's on the battlefield, whenever we cast a spell, we get to bounce a permanent. Not just a non-land, any permanent. Just imagine cheating this into play on turn 3, just start casting spells and bouncing people's lands. You just really lock people out of the game with this card. It's insane. Next up is the Reanimation category. As mentioned before, Hashaton doesn't exile the cards we make a copy of, so we can just reanimate the original creature again. And we actually utilize it in this deck. First up, we have Persist. For just 2 mana, we get to reanimate a creature with a small downside of putting a -1/-1 counter on it. Bodies are this big, the counter really won't matter. Victimize. We get to pick 2 creature cards in our graveyard. We sacrifice a creature, and then we can return those 2 creatures to the battlefield. Insane. 3 mana to reanimate 2 creatures. And we can just sacrifice Hashaton himself or a copy we just made with him. It's an efficient card. They do enter tap though, but all the creatures in this deck have a really good ETB effect anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Dread Return, really awesome card. One of my favorite reanimation spells. For 4 mana, and casting it, we just get to reanimate a creature. Pretty solid, not the best spell. It also has Flashback. We can sacrifice 3 creatures, we don't even have to pay the mana cost, and we also get to reanimate a creature. With our discard engines, we can even discard this card if we don't have the mana to hardcast it, to just sacrifice creatures to reanimate that way instead. Karmic Guide. This is basically reanimation, but attached to a creature. When it enters the battlefield, we get to reanimate a creature card from our graveyard. Very solid. Also has Echo. I don't know why you would cast it this way, but that means you have to pay the cost again on the next turn, or otherwise it gets sacrificed. Doesn't really matter, not relevant in this deck. What is relevant though, if we discard this, make a copy with Hashaton, also get an ETB trigger, and we get to reanimate a creature. Also has Protection Black, which might be relevant against some mono black players out there. Unburial Rites, perfect for a budget deck. It's 5 mana, just get to reanimate a creature. For 4 mana, we also get to flashback it and also reanimate a creature. Double the value on 1 card. What's really important with Hashaton is keeping our hand filled, because we will be able to discard a ton of cards with all the discard engines we're playing, but we actually do need big creatures in our hand, not in our graveyard. So Oversold Cemetery solves that problem. Beginning of our upkeep, when we have 4 or more creatures in our graveyard, we get to return 1 creature from our graveyard to our hand, allowing us to discard it again, make copies again. Very good enchantment. Before we continue to the interaction section, this video is based on our top 5 Aetherdrift Commander video, so don't forget to check that out. And we're wondering, what do you think about the format? Should we continue doing this in the future? Like for example for Dragonstorm, should we also do top 5 commanders and make a deck about every single one of them? Or should we do something different? Do you want to see older commanders? Maybe Balin, this was requested a lot. Iron Man has been requested, so let us know in the comments. The more votes we get for a deck, the bigger the chance we'll do a deck about it. Let's continue with my favorite part of the video. As you know, the interaction spells. We do play quite a lot of them this time, since we're in black, white, and blue. It's what the colors are good at. First up, obviously, we do play Counter Magic, an offer you can't refuse. 1 mana, we get to counter a non-creature spell and its owner creates 2 treasure tokens. You can counter a board wipe with this. It won't matter if they get the 2 treasure tokens. It's irrelevant because you just saved your entire board. Fantastic card. There are even removal spells that allow us to discard cards, just doubling up on the value. Bone Shards. For 1 mana, we get to destroy a creature or a planeswalker. As an additional cost, we do have to sacrifice a creature or discard a card. Discarding a card is actually a benefit in a Hashaton deck, so it's an efficient removal spell with an upside for this deck. Insane value. Obviously, I'm not gonna go over this in every single video. If we're in white, we're playing Pot and Swords. Let's continue. Stubborn Denial. This feels like a counter spell that just puts a slight tax on your opponents, allowing you to counter a non-creature spell unless they pay 1 extra. But it does have the ferocious mechanic, meaning if we control a creature with power 4 or more, we just get to counter that spell instead. 1 mana, counter. Usually the counters cost 3 mana. Hashaton zombies all have 4 power, so you will always have the ferocious active anyways. Bitter Triumph. Basically Bone Shards, but on instant speed. For 1 mana more, does the same thing. We get to destroy a creature or planeswalker, and we also have to discard a card. Once again, for our deck, this is an upside. Damn. Really efficient removal spell for 1 creature, just double black, get to destroy a creature, can be regenerated. We can also overload it to just make it function as a board wipe. We do play 2 board wipes in this deck, just because we can scale with the graveyard anyways. And Hashaton is a really cheap commander we can cast again. Sometimes you just have to reset the board. Dovin's Veto, one of the most efficient counter spells ever printed. Azorius Scholars can be countered itself, and we get to counter target non-creature spell. Rites of Refusal. This counter spell is really bad in most decks since it has a big downside. As an additional cost for the spell, we have to discard X cards. the opponent has to pay 3 generic mana more per discarded card, or the spell gets countered. Once again, in Hashaton, discarding the cards as a cost is a benefit. We get a 2 mana counter spell, and we get Hashaton triggers. Circular logic. A 3 mana counter spell, an opponent has to pay 1 generic mana per card in our graveyard or their spell gets countered. It's okay in a Hashaton deck because our graveyard will be filled, but it also has Madness for 1 blue mana. Imagine just having a creature on board that allows us to draw a card, discard a card, get to discard this, and for 1 mana, you get to cast this spell. Very, very solid. A 1 mana counter spell once again. Rootborn defenses. First up, it populates. Most people don't know what populate does. It just creates a copy of a token you control. Remember, the bodies Hashaton creates are tokens we can copy with populate. Also grants all our creatures indestructible until the end of turn, so it's sort of a protect your board spell. Perfect answer to a board wipe. You can even play our board wipe, Rootborn defenses, and it will function as a one-sided board wipe if you have the mana for it. Second board wipe we play is Supreme Verdict. Very awesome, really color specific, can be countered, destroys all creatures. Thus what an Azorius card has to do. Hashaton is really mana hungry. His ability only costs 3 mana to create a copy of a discarded card, but we actually want to do it multiple times a turn. So we do need a ton of mana. That's why we play a ton of ramp and acceleration, mainly mana rocks. Let's get into them. First up, Springleaf Drum. Awesome 1-drop artifact. We get to play it on turn 1. Imagine dropping Hashaton on turn 2. We can tap the creature, we can tap Springleaf Drum, and we generate a mana, really accelerating us in the process. Doesn't really matter if Hashaton is tapped or untapped anyway, since we won't be swinging with him. Loto Corrupt Sheriff. Yeah, I know, I shouldn't have put him with the mana rocks. He's way better than a regular mana rock. It's a 2-drop. Whenever a player casts their second spell in the turn, we lose 1 life and we generate 1 treasure token. Also triggers during your own turn of your own second spell cast. It's a very good card, should be included in most decks that play black and white. Relic of Legends, it's a 3 mana rock. Taps for mana of any color. We can also tap a legendary creature we control to add a mana of any color. So the relic actually produces mana itself, and we can tap untapped legendary creatures for more mana. This gets out of hand really quick, especially if we reanimate legendary creatures. Next up we have the regulars. Sol Ring, obviously. Arcane Signet, the Felwar Stone, and 3 of the signets in our colors. Last up, we have the land section. This is a budget deck, and the land base is the first thing I'd upgrade personally if you have more budget to invest in this deck. I'd mainly go with the shock lands, the fetch lands. These are great for a 3-color deck. We don't play them since they don't fit in the 100 euros. First up, we have Contaminated Landscape. Enters the battlefield untapped and taps for colorless. We also get to sacrifice it and search our library for a plains, swamp, or island and put it into play tapped, working as a semi-fetch land, filtering our deck. You can also cycle it for all 3 of our colors, which might be a benefit in the late game. Exotic Orchard. Perfect land if you're on a budget in a 3-color deck. You tap it and you get to add mana to your pool of a land that your opponents control that they can produce. Nimbus Maze. This is one of the more unique lands in a very unique land cycle. Taps for colorless when it enters. If you control a plains while this is on the battlefield, it also taps for blue. If we control an island, it also taps for white. Very cool card. Spymaster's Vault. It's for Modern Horizons 3. It enters untapped if we control a swamp. We do play a ton of basic, so mostly this will enter untapped. Generates black mana for 1 black mana, and tapping it, a creature gets to connive X, where X is the amount of creatures that dies this turn. Perfect discard outlet on a card. If someone plays a board wipe, we connive, we get to discard a ton of cards, going through our deck really fast. Cephalid Coliseum produces 1 blue mana for the cost of 1 life. Doesn't even enter tapped, so it's very solid, no downside whatsoever. Life is a resource. When we have Threshold, meaning we have 7 or more cards in our graveyard, we get to sacrifice it and target player draws 3 cards and then discards 3 cards. Very solid in the late game with Hashaton if you don't have discard outlets or you really need to draw cards. Obviously, we also play 1 command tower, should include this in any commander deck really. We play 3 of the Pain lands, the lands that deal 1 damage to you if you tap them for any color, or you can tap them for colorless for free. 3 of the Check lands, which check if you have a basic of specific type in play, so they enter untapped. 3 of the Slow lands, these actually have basic land types, so you can fetch them up with Contaminated Landscape, and they help our Check lands enter untapped. If you have 2 or more basic lands, they also enter untapped. Fantastic. We also play 3 filter lands. Just put 1 generic mana into them and they grant back 2 mana of the colors they produce. We play 8 swamps, 5 islands, and 5 plains. As mentioned before, that's the price you pay for building a budget deck. The land base will not be as fantastic as it would be in a non-budget deck. That's it for our budget Hashaton deck tech. We did a community poll on YouTube about what Aetherdrift commander you would like to see a deck tech about. It's the last Aetherdrift commander we will do, and the winner is Captain Howler. Also a discard-based deck, but entirely different than Hashaton. It's way more interaction, way more swinging with creatures, no reanimation whatsoever. I actually already started it and it's really fun. Make sure to share this video with your entire family, press the like button, hit subscribe, push the bell so you know when the Captain Howler video is going live. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace.